Hi, I'm Heather and I've teamed up with Grafix to introduce you to the Opaque Black Craft Plastic that they're releasing. It's a new substrate. They already have a similar thing in white, but this one is black and you can use watercolor, alcohol inks, markers, all sorts of different materials on it. I'm going to be embossing on it and painting on it with pearlescent paints. The craft plastic has a slightly shinier side. Neither side is glossy, but there's one side that's slightly shinier than the other, and I'm using the less shiny side. Just holding it down with a little bit of tape, which I didn't need, and you'll see why I shouldn't have used that, but wasn't a hassle. And I'm stamping on it with Penny Black's Splendiferous stamp and VersaMark sticky clear ink. I'm making sure to just put powder over the surface with an anti-static powder bag, because as you can imagine, a plastic surface can be quite staticky, but all it needed was the powder bag to go over it to stop it from attracting embossing powder later. I usually do 2 impressions of the VersaMark ink, just because it is clear and sometimes it's hard to see, although it is much easier to see on the craft plastic than it is on some surfaces. You can see the shiny image there. I'm using silver embossing powder. It's from Brutus, Monroe, and it's called Sterling, and it's a lovely silver fine embossing powder. And I'm just going to flick that off, and you can see where I had that tiny little bit of tape. It's left enough stickiness that the embossing powder stuck to it, but I just brushed that off with a brush and got rid of it easily. Now this is a plastic surface, so I want to be careful not to buckle it with the heat, and all I need to do to make sure is to just keep the heat tool moving. So and I have it as hot as possible before I start, and then once all the embossing powder is melted on one side, I just heat it from the other side a little bit to reverse that bend in the plastic, and then we're good to go. I'm using Coliro pearlescent paints. They're made by Finetech, same company, different name. And when you're using these kind of paints, you have to add water and then just let it sit for a little while, probably 2 or 3 minutes. And then once you've let it sit and soak in a little bit, you really mix it around, because there's a lot of tiny shimmery particles in the paint, and you really want a little bit of that in, well, you want a lot of that in every bit of paint that you pick up. So you mix it around, and it's kind of a creamy consistency, not as thick as cream, but not as watery as some watercolor paints, because in this case, I'm not going for any transparency. I want the shimmer of the paints to show up on the black background. If I added more water to the paints, they would be more transparent and I could see some of the black through, but I'm getting really quite solid coverage with the shimmer paints, so that my embossed areas are going to be colored, and then my background is going to be the black of the craft plastic. I'm just using 1 green on the leaves and the tiny stems. I can get a little bit of paint into those tiny stems just because I've got a nice fine tip on my watercolor brush. And then moving on to the petals of the tulips. And I really enjoyed this part. The embossing makes it nice and easy to stay inside the lines, and I decided to do the tulips in a mix of pink and bronze. So I did all the bases of the tulips in pink, just switching back and forth from a tiny size 2 brush to a size 4 brush, just depending on how small the spaces were that I needed to get the brush into. And then the ends of the petals I did in the bronze. And I'm not so much making a new color, a mix with the bronze and the pink. It's more of a blend where one moves into the other, and so the pink moves a bit into the wet bronze paint and the bronze travels a little bit into the pink paint. A nice thing about painting on this craft plastic is the fact that the paint stays wet for longer. It's sitting on plastic, it's not soaking in, it's sitting on the surface. So there's plenty of time for the bronze and the pink to mingle there, and they do it really nicely, and I get a feathered end to the petals, quite like you see on tulips that are two-colored. One color comes from the base, and then there's that color on the tips of the petals that just feathers into the base color. And I was able to recreate that quite well on the craft plastic with these pearlescent paints. There are a lot of things that you can do on this new craft plastic. Alcohol inks will be a lovely one. I've played around with that a little bit, and I can share that with you sometime on another project. Markers, particularly paint markers, really pop on the Opaque Black Craft Plastic. So that's something that I'll try with some lettering at some point. So I would encourage you to check out the graphixarts.com site to see what other artists are doing with this new substrate. When I'd finished all my tulips, I set them aside to dry, and I gave them plenty of time to dry because, like I said before, the paint's going to sit wet on the surface for quite a while. So I set that aside for a few hours to dry. I didn't want to heat it to dry because I didn't want to risk melting any of that embossing powder or anything like that. So I just set that aside, and I stamped a little sentiment on a piece of gold shimmer cardstock with a sentiment from the Penny Black Only You set. It's made up of two stamps, some little words, and the big U, and I stamped that in black to coordinate with the black craft plastic on the gold shimmer gold cardstock, and then trimmed that off and put some adhesive foam tape on the back and popped it up on the card. I ended up choosing the same shimmer gold cardstock for the card base, so that links in with the bronzy color. And then just to get off that original anti-static powder that I dusted all over the plastic, I used a tissue to just kind of polish it, and a stray little bit of embossing powder came off easily just with my fingernail taking that off. So I hope you enjoyed that, seeing what I did with the new Opaque Black Craft Plastic, and I hope you look out for it in your local shops and check out Grafix Arts website to see what else you can do with it. Thanks for joining me. Bye.